Next item.
Approval of minutes of the following Dearborn Board of Education meetings. A Building and Site Committee meeting, November 13th, 2017. Policy Committee meeting, November 13th, 2017. Finance Committee meeting, November 13th, 2017. Executive Session P12, closed for negotiations, November 13th, 2017. Regular P12 meeting, November 13th, 2017. Special meeting, closed expulsion, December 4th, 2017. Special meeting, closed expulsion, December 4th, 2017. Recommended action, make any necessary corrections, and move approval of these minutes.
So moved.
Support. Okay, so we had a pile of minutes to read through. Did anyone notice any mistakes or corrections? I read them. I thought they were perfect. As usual, yeah. So can I attach a unanimous affirmative vote to this? Very
Yes.
good. Done. Thank you. Next.
Special reports, special populations. Dr. Yusuf Masalam, Mr. Mike Asili, Ms. Rose Abdaly.
Good evening. Excuse me. Good evening, Board President, Mrs. Lane, Board Trustees, and Superintendent Dr. Maleko. So I have Rose Aldabailey to my right, and I have Mr. Asili to my left. Mr. Asili is the Interim Director for Special Education, and Mrs. Rose Aldabailey is the Director for ELL and Compensatory Education. So today's presentation, it will start out with a little bit of research that I conducted through my PhD process and how that feeds into the conversation of special populations. The focus of the presentation is to identify and to discuss where we as a district are headed to support our students in special education, our English language learners, as well as our students that are considered at risk that are supported through Title I funding and Title III funding. So to start out real quick, sorry for that. The title of my PhD research was Literacy Instruction in the High School. And basically, the purpose of the study was to examine the instructional practices of a secondary EL language arts teacher in the high school. And the reason why my advisors and I chose to do this was because based on the research that was available at the time, there is very limited to really no research that focuses solely on high school age students that are of EL descent and are EL in our population. The majority of the research focused on elementary through middle school, but the majority of that was the early L, looking at language development and language growth. So the study, real quick, was of qualitative design. It focused on a microethnography, wherein the focus was on a set of students in a classroom. And the reason why we focused on qualitative design was so that the observations and the questions and the focus was more based on real life actions. It wasn't based on quantitative data such as the PSAT data or NWEA data, or at that time it was the MEP data, moving towards MSTEP, but it was more focused on what the student perceptions of their instruction was. And through that process, what we did was the evaluation of the process was over 50 hours of observations, student surveys, student discussions, evaluation of lesson planning, as well as evaluation of student work. And at the end, through the survey data and through the conversations, we drew from the microethnographic study the perceptions of the students, and then we put all that information together to identify what we identified as a cognitive cycle for ELL learners in the secondary setting. And part of this cognitive cycle, and I'll lead into how that relates to special populations, is that the students, what they were able to do, these were ELs, these were students that were first generation in this country, were in this country for less than 2 years. Many of the students were of 1 year, and there's more data to break it down, but that would have been an hour and a half presentation. I know you didn't want that. And what we identified was that through this cognitive cycle, the students where English was their second language, through the processes used, were able to make connections to the text that they were reading and or were learning how to read, because those connections were based on real life situations. Students were talking and reading about things that impacted them prior to coming to the United States. It's sad to say that the impact on them was war, and it was a conversation of struggle and being of refugee status. But because we used something that was very similar to what they were familiar with, they were able to draw those connections. Through those textual connections, we then identified their ability to use metacognition. Too often with ELs, especially in the high school setting, because they don't speak English, we tend to reduce the level of rigor. But what we understand and we identified through the research, and a lot of the research that we had that supported this, was that these students' level of metacognition was just as high, if not higher, than many students that were attending in AP classes, even though English was their second language, and many of these students, their first language, they were not fully versed in. They could not read or write in their first language. Through this metacognition, they were able to build upon their literacy skills. Now, through this cycle, yes.
Can you define metacognition?
I apologize, yes I can. Metacognition is the ability of the student to think and to go through the thought process internally and therefore self-regulate their learning as they are going through the process. So, and that's something that we try to do on a regular basis, no matter if it's literacy or numeracy, ELs or non-ELs, special ed or non-special ed. We want the students to use metacognition to be able to self-regulate their learning. Through the research, we found that through these textual connections, which led to metacognition, which led to the literacy skills, by allowing them to focus on universal things, textual connections to their own personal experiences, as well as focusing on the 5 domains of language, which also represents academic vocabulary. In the research, there are 4 domains of language: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Through the research that we conducted, we added a 5th domain, and that 5th domain was presentation. I here am presenting to you. This is a different type of language domain than it is if you and I are sitting and having a conversation together. So through these domains, we were able to identify that these secondary EL students were finding success. More importantly is that through this success process, the textual connections that they made, the metacognitive awareness, led to the development of academic vocabulary. These secondary English learners in the high school were using vocabulary that what we would consider Bloom's taxonomy level 3 and level 4. And they were able to use that in sequence. Now, they weren't writing extravagant papers or articles, but they were taking their language to the next level because they were able to self-regulate that learning due to their experiences. More importantly, those textual connections also worked with their interaction and their inference. And there were some examples of how they used it. So finally, through the use of appropriate textual connections and the use of metacognition, that self-regulation allowed them to monitor their comprehension, which again, therefore, allowed them to self-regulate their learning. So how does that relate to special populations? Well, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Asaley to talk about special education. But the idea behind it is that by us working as a solid unit, special education, EL, compensatory education, Title I at risk, and Title III, we're able to use this emphasis on academic vocabulary, metacognition, and self-regulation, not only to support in students' literacy and numeracy growth, but additionally to support them in their social-emotional growth. So, Mr. Asaley?
Thank you, Dr. Masalam. President Lane, Superintendent Maleko, trustees, thank you for the opportunity here today to present on special populations. It's been truly a great experience this year, working not only with Dr. Masalam, but Ms. Aldebeli as well, as coming into a more concentrated effort and a cohesive group, not only to help special populations, but hopefully to help all students. There's a couple of parts in my presentation I'm going to focus on. The first part is just an overall general overview of who we are in special ed. The second part are some of the things we're working in collaboration with the EL department to enhance some of our educational models. In the strategic plan, Dr. Maleko's strategic plan, our district strategic plan, special populations is often mentioned. The strategic points that I'm showing over here on the PowerPoint are in reference to what are some collaborative efforts we have with the EL department and other departments as well throughout the district. As you see, there are many points in the strategic plan that talk about co-teaching. Co-teaching is not only concentrated to special ed, the EL department also implements some co-teaching as well, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the presentation. Another thing is a couple of our special education overall goals. We want to focus on a couple of things. We always want to focus on achievement, and part of our goal is to increase our graduation percentage by 5% each year in the special education department, at least from last year to this year. And another goal of ours is to develop capacity amongst our staff within the special education group. That's why we've we've started different leadership groups and different things along those lines, which I'll touch on a little bit later in our presentation. The first thing I want to touch on is some of our data. If you guys look and see, as a district, our identification rate this year is only at about 8.5%. Of the 21,000 students or so, only 1,794 of those students are identified as having an IEP or special needs. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is not only because it's far lower than both the county and state averages, but I think that really speaks highly to our collaboration. We do many other things within our district to try to be proactive to see that students aren't identified with special needs. Now, sometimes, you know, depending on the severity of the disability or whatnot, there's so much you can or can't do. However, processes like MTSS, where we are collaborating with the EL department teachers, and EL and special ed work together for some of those early interventions to try and alleviate the identification of some students with IEP. So we're very proud of the fact that here in Dearborn, our identification rate is lower than most of the state and county averages. Just some things about our programs overall in general in special education. We are running many resource programming throughout the entire district. Each of our schools does have resource programming, and the way we deliver our services and methods is through co-teaching. However, we also have basic classrooms in our district. We have classrooms for students with emotional impairments. Those are currently at Whitmore Bowles and O.L. Smith. We also have classrooms for students with physical impairments over at Cotter, Nowlin, Stout, and Etzel Ford. We also have early childhood special education classrooms. Now, for those classrooms, those are for our populations from 3 to about 5 or 6 years old, and they're going to be at Whitmore Bowles. We have 3 classrooms. We also have 15 classrooms for students with autism in our district as well. You'll find that's going to be at Whitmore Bowles, Nowlin, O.L. Smith, and Dearborn High for the high school. We also have classrooms for students with mild cognitive impairments. We currently have classrooms over at, actually we're opening a new one, a K2 MySci classroom this week over at William Ford. We also have classrooms over at Miller, Snow, and Stout and Woodworth. For students with moderate cognitive impairments, we have classrooms at Snow, Stout, Etzel Ford, and Howe. And for students with severe cognitive impairments or who are severely multiple impaired, we have classrooms over at Howe School. Part of some of this collaboration and work with Dr. Masal and Ms. Aldubaili is we have a partnership with Wayne State University, and our partnership includes having some Wayne State interns or student teachers actually do their student teaching here in Dearborn as a pipeline from doing student teaching into possibly hiring them as full-time teacher or staff within our district. This past semester, we actually had 5 interns in our district from Wayne State University, and actually 3 of them we're looking at as hiring as full-time teachers. There's obviously many benefits of that. One is you kind of get to groom the staff, work with the staff, and secondly, you really get to know these candidates on a more intimate level, understand their work ethic, their strengths and weaknesses, rather than just the 30-minute interview process that sometimes we go through. So we're very excited with that program. I do want to talk about some of our special projects and initiatives. Again, like I mentioned previously, a lot of these projects and initiatives we are working closely with the EL department on. With co-teaching, we did have Ann Benninghoff, who many of you are aware of, who came into our district. She's a co-teaching expert. This is our 2nd year working with her. And not only is she training some of our special education staff, but many times our EL staff is in there with her during a lot of professional development opportunities. Progress monitoring. We're actually working very closely right now with the EL department to look at different ways to monitor the progress of some of our students. And the point from progress monitoring is we consistently want to look at that data and make changes to some of our instruction and really understand where the students are and what some of their needs are to adapt. The 3D model, this has been around, some of you may or may not know, but it's truly not only just special ed and EL working together, but we're also working with the general ed population as well as to how to enhance instruction and what's best for all students. Something we've been working very closely with the EL department is also over our summer programs, the Accelerated Summer Academic Program. We collaborate with them. We pick some of our at-risk students, our IEP students, as well as, Rose will talk about some of the ELs that are selected. We collaborate, we develop programming that meets their needs in both reading, writing, and math. And another thing we're doing in the district that we're very proud of, especially within our special education department, and this is something we're collaborating with everybody with, is restorative practices. As part of some of our grant money, that we've had over the last couple years. We've implemented restorative practices. We piloted it at 8 schools last year. We've grown the program to 9 schools, and we hope to continue to grow the program overall as the years continue. This is just some of the professional development that we're offering this year within our special education department, as well as the EL department as well, if you want to look at it. I did mention on a couple of points, just some things I do want to mention on is we are going to be offering CPI training, which is nonviolent crisis intervention. That is part of the seclusion and restraint awareness protocol that was recently approved by MDE this past summer. And I'm going to turn it over to Rose now.
Good evening. So Mike talked a little bit about, quite a bit about our collaboration. So I'll just give you a little introduction to who we are as the EL department. For today's presentation, we hit on a couple of different areas of the strategic plan. Under the umbrella of the human resources, we hit action point 1 and 3. Under special programs and resources, we hit action point 4. And then for partnerships, we've hit on action points 1 and 3. So our EL department has several goals, but the 2 goals SMART goals that we're addressing today are going to be that by July 1st of 2018 to increase the number of teachers being hired in with an ESL endorsement or the willingness to obtain one by 5% in order to close the achievement gap for all students. The other goal would be by July 1st of 2018 to increase the number of students being exited. On the slide it says excited, which should also be exciting, by 5% from the EL program as measured by the state exit criteria. Our demographics, as of count date, we have 20,907 students in our district. Of those students, 9,885 are EL. So about 47% of our students are identified as English language learners. Of our 47% in our 9,000 students, we have 1,830 who are identified as immigrants. So students who have been in the country for less than 3 years, born outside of the country. Number of refugees of that 1,830 would be 414. The one thing to keep in mind is that being identified with refugee status is limited to certain countries, so we have quite a bit of our kids coming in having experienced the trauma of war who are not coming in with that label. So we had to keep that in mind when planning for our students coming in. In fact, a few weeks ago there was a special on 60 Minutes that addressed a large population of ours and what they're going through in their homeland. The chart that we're presenting is just a snapshot of who our ELs are. Exciting for us is that our subgroup that used to be a concern, our long-term ELs, which used to be our largest group of ELs, is now our smallest group of ELs. Our largest group of ELs are our 1 to 3 year students who've been receiving services in the district for 1 to 3 years. Most of those students are our immigrant students or students who've been in the district for less than 3 years. So we're looking at about 3,800. For our kids who've been in the district for about 4 to 6 years, we're looking at about 2,700. And for our long-term ELs who've been in our district receiving services for 6 or more years, we're down to about 2,100 students. So supporting teachers has been a big piece of making sure that instruction is set up for all students in the classroom. So it's for language development for ELs, for our at-risk students, for our Title I students. And one of the ways that we've done this is by partnering with several universities. Our 4 strongest partnerships are with Madonna University, where we have an Apples grant that supports our paraprofessionals and some of our certified teachers in obtaining an ESL endorsement with no cost at all to them. Western Michigan University has created a cohort that allows a big chunk, almost 50% of tuition to be paid for while they're going through their endorsement program. Wayne State offers classes on-site in district, so you can leave your classroom, walk away being a teacher at 3:45, and walk in at 4 o'clock and be a student right here in the district. And then U of M also had several grant opportunities, really spearheaded by Dr. Masalam and Dr. Adler. And so we've tried to relieve some of that financial strain that our teachers are dealing with when they come in. Also, one of the things that we're looking at is if you look at over the last 3 years, we've seen an increase in the number of teachers hired. The new hires in 2015-16 were 62 hires. 50 of them were into the department and made that commitment to get the endorsement. 6 walked in with an endorsement, 44 are currently working on one. If we fast forward to this year, we have 172 new hires, 95 were hired into the department and made that commitment to obtain the endorsement, 12 walking in with one and 83 currently working on one. One of the other things that the district is doing is that we get partial tuition reimbursement. So as they complete classes, we have a set aside money that we give them. It changes every year depending on the amount of teachers who are putting in, and that's extended to every teacher in the district. It's not just our departmental teachers. And depending on the amount of credits, that will determine the amount of money that they're getting. So last year was a great year for our teachers because they got about $300 of credit back. We also have our ELD specialists. We have about 55 that is increasing with our Section 41 grant. And their role really truly is to support our newcomers and our teachers working with EL. So they're a part of our leadership team in professional development, school improvement planning. They extend their hand reaches into every classroom and every family and every student. Our next slide kind of covers some of the professional development that we provide. I'll highlight 3. SIOP has been around for a very long time, and that talks about, we're looking at 40 different components of creating lesson planning so that the scaffolding is available for our ELs. And one of our newer initiatives and one of our best practices that we found along the lines as learners, because we know that we have to continue learning to be able to support our teachers, is the language and literacy, which takes SIOP and condenses it to 7 steps of creating a language-rich environment. And really the difference is that teachers are looking at the perspective of my behaviors as an educator, how am I delivering instruction so that it's comprehensible to students, and how am I allowing them to use all of those domains, the reading, the writing, the listening, the speaking, and the presenting. And then finally, what we added last year, because we do recognize the struggles and the traumas that our kids are coming in with, is culturally responsive training. So we ourselves have attended several trainings, and we're working on working with several buildings and culturally responsive training. Next. Okay. So the next chart or table is really the enrollment of our ELs over the last 4 years. Our enrollment continues to increase, but so do our exits, and it's really exciting. Last year, we were concerned that we'd actually have a decline in our exits because the test was not changed, but the rigor was changed. The cut score was raised. They raised the cut score, so the expectation from the state and districts was that we would see a decline. However, we saw quite an increase. We went from 890 exits to 1,200 exits, which was phenomenal. Next. Did we hit that? Did we miss one? Yeah, the parent component. So our district parent, the other part that I'm sorry, I'm going over, it's kind of my thing. I'm going to really wrap up real quick. So the district parent meeting component part is also a part that we felt was important, making sure that our parents were partners. And last year we started district parent meetings for our new families. And so we provide transportation. They're here every other month. We surveyed our parents. And really, it's been tailored to who they are, what they want. So we've had adult ed here. We've had breakout sessions where we'd have lawyers here to discuss immigration. We had health, dental, and we've had Michigan Works here to work with getting them jobs for our parents who were unemployed. And that continues. Our coordinator, Maylee Masalam, has been a big part of spearheading that initiative. And then finally, what happens to our ELs when they leave Dearborn? So we look at our graduation rate at about 93%. Our ELs are graduating at about 89%. And then we look at the number of kids who are attending college. We look at 76% for all students. Our EL population showing about 70. What we don't see and what is not considered are pathways that are other than a 2-year and a 4-year college. We don't know how many are getting certifications in other skilled areas and trainings. If you look at our 4-year enrollment for ELs, it's pretty low, but it's on trend because a lot of our ELs are starting at the community colleges because that language support is available to them, and then they transfer over. But when we receive this information from the state, it's where they currently are. That's it.
Okay, questions? I know there was a lot. Yeah, Dr. Mead is still recovering. Trustee Punchilkoff.
Well, I'll let Trustee Thorpe go. He had his hand up first.
Oh,
You
sorry.
mentioned the new hires. How long does it take them to get the certification?
So we have a 4-year agreement with our new hires, and we've paced it out so that it's 3 years, 3 credits their first year, and then 6 credits every other year. And what we do is to help support them being on track. Every year we touch base with them to find out, have you taken your class? What's your plan for next year? And then, because we don't want them to wait till year 4 and then try to jam pack 21 to 24 credits to get an endorsement. One of the other benefits to them is during our summer program, If we have enough people, we tack on a college course right to the summer program. So an hour and a half after, they can stay beyond, and they earn quite a few credits because working in the program counts as field work, and then they have coursework in their class.
So did this start in 2015? Was that the first
So
year
it's
you
been
showed the
going on
numbers?
for a while, but it's evolved quite a bit in the last 3 years.
So would you expect in the next year or two that we're going to start seeing a lot more of the staff have the endorsement then?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
Some of the numbers, you said we have about 2,100 still English language learners after 6 years of being with us. I know on average, we would probably like to see them exit out a little sooner. Do you see a particular reason why certain students are not progressing quite, or is it just
So our English
the
language,
numbers?
so when they take the WIDA test, the English Language Development Assessment, they're scoring very high. What's holding them back is the other assessment, which would be the NWEA assessment,
Okay.
their local assessment piece. And that's, with interventions, we're really targeting, when we look at our kids who are a WIDA 6, we look at, okay, what area in their NWEA, where's that gap? And we
Where
start
they
to really
fit, yeah.
target that intervention. Those numbers have really allowed us to focus on individualized planning for our students. And that individualized planning is really what showed us the growth in that exiting.
Okay, so there isn't one particular
No.
reason or trend of difficulty or challenge. It's more,
It's really
Generic,
identifying their,
yeah.
right, their learning strategies and identifying the gap and trying to fill the gap.
okay.
One thing, if I just may add, through the research also, it was identified that when students hit that WIDA 2, they tend to start to struggle because then they have to go to the next level of that academic vocabulary. And that's where, what Rose is speaking of, is those local assessments. That's when, so then we start, like Rose stated, we start to focus in and narrow down how we're working specifically. And then with the special populations working together, that narrowing of the gap, hopefully in time, will take us to the next level.
I was also curious about that group, and I have to say, to have any, maybe it's a simplistic view. I suppose we would want to have 0 in after 6 years, but having struggled myself to learn other languages, I know it's a challenge. So I was kind of curious what services are being provided still to a post-6-year group.
So the part where was going to be the acceptance speech piece that I was going to ask for to thank everybody was a big part of what's happening with WIDA 5s and 6s. So our ELD specialists work specifically with newcomers, but they work with classroom teachers. And those best practices of learning to pull small groups of our students who are struggling, regardless of WIDA level and whether or not they're EL, is really where the impact is for our kids who are WIDA 5s and 6s. What does that small group look like? What is that pairing of level of text? How does it compare to what their grade level text is? How are we building that background for our students? What is that fine line between inquiry and frustration? What tools do we give them in order for them to be able to start to inquire and wonder about what we're teaching them? So a lot of that comes from, it isn't just an EL teacher in our department. To be honest with you, it's been all hands on deck. Our DFT, our ADSA, our superintendent, our executive directors. I have our members here from the department who are in classrooms every day working with new teachers. I have Kelly Bagaitsky, Janine Anoyan, May Masalam, Amina Elder, and then Nadra Shami, who's not here, who coach teachers and who also support with professional development. And the key has been that they too have been learners. They show up. They show up for the building, they show up for the staff, and our teachers have been showing up for our kids. So extended day
Has there
has
been
worked.
any attempt to put some of the higher level ELs with some of our Seal of Biliteracy students also? Has there been
Yeah.
any use of
Yeah,
of
no, I
the
do.
the opposite skill sets of those two groups?
Yeah, so even really with our identification of EL classrooms, they're not limited to just students who are 1s and 2s. We try to balance all of our rooms so that we have students who can be models for our kids. So our students who are WIDA 5s and 6s are in our mainstream classrooms and may not have a teacher who's endorsed, but has had professional development on some of the best practices that'll help to excel their proficiency and their comprehension of some of the academic language. As far as the seal of biliteracy, we started to nurture it a few years ago, but Dr. Masalam can speak to what we're doing as far as that alignment goes.
So several of our students who have attained a seal of biliteracy were designated as ELs. And what we have worked on is that currently we have 2 staff members working directly with Michigan Department of Education, because the Michigan Department of Education is coming out with the Michigan seal of biliteracy. We have Cheryl Katzman over at Ethel Ford and Nabila Hamami over at Fortson, who have been attending those meetings. And they've been looking at a lot of things that we're doing in Dearborn. So how we're implementing that is many of our students who are coming to us as immigrants that are able to pass the language arts component, the English language arts component on the standardized testing, these are ELs who are true bilingual students. When I say true bilingual students, they're speaking English at a comprehensive level, reading and writing, speaking, and they read, write, and speak their primary language at the highest level. We even had some students who have graduated from us, and I believe that are trilingual, who came to this country speaking Arabic, learned English through our EL department, and then took Spanish courses or French courses in the high school. And so we have had that happen. The students that come in later in age, 15, 16, 17, that are English is their second language, the older they are, the harder it is for them to get the seal of biliteracy. But when they come in at the freshman or sophomore level, there is that opportunity. But then again, you have the separation of students who come in who have formal education from the country in which they came from, to students who come to us as refugee status who may have interrupted education for 2 to 3 years. When we get to the secondary level, which is the research I talked about in the beginning, when we get to the secondary level and they come in with interrupted schooling 2 to 3 years, it's going to take a little bit longer to get them to that point. The other piece, the reason why it's so important that we have special populations working together is because when they first come in that first year, we don't look at them for special education services. But through the MTSS process, the multiple tiers of support, the difference now is our MTSS process is not to identify students for special education. Our MTSS process is to identify what we can do to help the student. And there is why Mr. Say mentioned that our identification numbers are down, because we're identifying that they just need additional supports instead of giving them an IEP. We exhaust all means before we go to an individual education plan.
And we've shifted the mindset to what can we do differently to support the students.
That being said, I do have a concern, and I've brought this up to Dr. Maleko. We're supposed to be not moving on third graders who don't achieve at level. So that's going to be particularly problematic for new students coming in who don't have the English language. And I just wondered what our thinking is on that.
And, well, we're going to plan, I'm talking to Dr. Chokol, and we'll be working with Ms. Aldebele. We're going to have a presentation we'll bring to the board just to kind of get it out there in the future.
Yeah, I think
but
parents need to know
yeah,
that for
yeah.
sure.
And I know that waivers and portfolios are available,
yeah.
but I also have that concern because we
Yeah,
have such
yeah.
a high number. And so
Yeah.
I sit on a committee with the, sorry. So I'm sitting in a state level committee where we are discussing what we do for our ELs and the larger numbers. We have the highest number of ELs in the state.
For
So-
sure we would.
And we're getting some support from the county, my county superintendent meetings. We've had presenters on this topic and how to really support that read by third grade. So that's going to continue with Dr. Lipa and the Wayne County Superintendent Association.
Trustee Hamud.
Thank you. And thank all three of you for your presentation. It's nice to see that the last time you were here, Rose, we had discussed the idea of starting this district parent meetings and new families and educating them, and now with this presentation, we see that coming to life. And this subject is very important to me because my family and I came here at the age of 11, barely knew any English, learned English in Dearborn Public Schools. It was a great program back then, even a better program now. And then in high school, I took French. So I was able to graduate knowing 3 different languages, right? But one thing is, especially with the refugees, not only are they economically disadvantaged, but when they are coming here, it would be really nice to see the state invest more, or maybe invest in our schools or in those students like they do sometimes in their housing or their foods, because education, if you want to see them to productive citizens of society, we have to invest in their education because I think that that's where it starts. So not only are they economically disadvantaged, but they're also dealing with areas such as trauma and so on, and not knowing the language. So I know that you had stated that this is a team effort and so on. Are we providing also counseling for those students when they are coming?
So on our steering committee, we were very intentional about who was on our steering committee. Rolla Badley Gates, who is a social worker, sits in on the committee. And we've had breakout sessions that deal with trauma. We've had breakout sessions that deal with social services. And so what we did is we surveyed the parents to see what it is that they need, what it is they'd like to hear about, and then they've also, in that time, built relationships with our teams where they reach out on a regular basis. And we ourselves have been going through trauma training so that we can then share with our buildings and our staff how to deal with the traumas and recognize the traumas. And special education is
Right.
focused on that also.
And actually, part of the restorative practices, we've been partnering a lot with Mr. Dean Charles here, who's the affective coordinator here in the district, is we actually do have a presenter coming in who focuses not only with restorative practices, but on trauma, and how that affects or impacts our students, and how it affects and impacts their learning, and what are some things or strategies we can do to kind of assist some of these students. And what we've done is we've gathered actually all counselors, social workers, and other staff as well to be part of these trainings and presentations. So it is something we're definitely focused on and working on collaboratively to benefit all students.
And Fedwa, we recognize that through our meetings, we have about 110 parents who attend our meetings. We recognize very quickly that our parents are dealing with the traumas too. And the realities of our students are different. One of our students was pulled out of class and asked for permission because his father is blind. And so he wants his support to attend the meeting. And so there are those things that we had to navigate through and work through to make sure that we were there for our families so that they are a part of this, and navigating through becoming a part of a community, and for the community to start to become a part of supporting them and nurturing a healthy family and a healthy student. And so we try to do what we can to support.
Absolutely. One other question, and Mr. Isali, and I think this would apply to both, is educating and working with the general ed population. So for example, it's very important, I think, for students, for the staff to be aware of the diversity that exists within our schools, whether it's special education or English language learners. If you have a student with autism, for example, the student is not only dealing with his teacher, but they're also dealing with the general staff at large, whether it's a secretary at school, whether it is, someone in our engineering department. And often, and I have heard this, the student is maybe treated in some way, maybe because they're not educated about his condition. And do we currently have something in place, or how could we improve on maybe some training to be able to deal with those students in the way that they should be treated? Is, hey, listen, they're not misbehaving, but they might have a special condition that this engineer might not know about, or the secretary might think it's misbehaving, and calling them out on it.
Absolutely. Actually, that's a great point. So we've done a couple of things. One of the things that we're doing right now is we're actually presenting to gen ed teachers who possibly have some of our students with more severe disabilities at departmental meetings. A second thing we did actually just this past Friday at O.L. Smith was we worked with the principal over there, and we presented to the student body as to what some of these students with more severe disabilities, what are some of their strengths, what are some of their weaknesses, what does it look like to work and collaborate with some of these students. And another thing that we're doing is we're really big on peer-to-peer type groups, where we have specific peers partnering up with some of our other students with disabilities and collaborating in that sense. And I think you bring up a good point, and part of our purpose and our role is to educate everybody as to how to interact with specific students, because you are right. Interacting sometimes with a student with a more severe disability like autism is very different than interacting with any other student, and I think educating our staff is very important. Those are some of the things that we are starting within our department, so great point there.
And I look forward for the department working on that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
It is a good point, and I'd like to just insert quickly, because I know Trustee Petchikoff is waiting, but there are so many examples that I've heard in our district of all kinds of staff that maybe don't have a particular student, but it makes a huge difference, that interaction, and most of our staff does a really nice job, from custodians to teachers to principals, and it can really affect a student's day. So, yeah, generally speaking, it's pretty good, but that's a good point. Trustee Petchikoff,
And I'm
sorry.
kind of, I'm going to be kind of talking along the same line. I know everybody is challenged with their time availability and everything, but we know that at any given time in any building, we may have parent or student or teacher volunteers who may be the mentor that those families or other students might need to help guide them, because sometimes they might not even know the questions they should be asking of what they need if they're new to the country and are coming from a displaced kind of environment where they don't know what to expect here. So if they have somebody who can kind of guide them along the way and support them just emotionally that way, it might help. But I don't want to say that we need a club or a group in every building. I know that Fortson has done some things over the past few years to welcome newcomers and to kind of, help them through the system, so to speak. But we know that the siblings, the parents, whoever else, probably could use that kind of support as well. So have we considered expanding on that in any way without making it so burdensome to any one building?
Well, I'll let Rose speak, but I know in our department, we have a parent liaison, Lila Amen, who often visits with our families and truly advocates for our families, and truly brings to light some of their needs. And then from there, when we find out if there is a family in need or there's somebody that we can support, oftentimes or all the time, our team develops a plan in order to support some of those families and whatnot.
And same for us. A lot of our buildings have used some of their Title I funds, recognizing that we do need that bridge. And so we have parent liaisons in several of our buildings. But the other key really for our ELs and our newcomers and our new families have been our English language development specialists. They really are that bridge between the school, the classroom, and the parent. They know every family that they're working with. They know what they've gone through, what their needs are, and they know every one of those students and what their backgrounds are. It's really heartwarming, and honestly, I don't know that I could wrap my brain around the number of kids that they know so intimately in their families and the details, because they're the first person that family meets after the secretary. And there's an intake that they take, and just the informal questioning and the introduction and the working with the families and bringing them in to start to show them what little strategies are that they can support even if they don't speak the language, and little outreach things, going to access the local market, the local mosque or church. There are different areas that they've tried to touch base. If we find have someone who doesn't speak the language Arabic, then we find different ways to communicate with them. We try to find a native language speaker that speaks their native language, or we found software that helps us communicate from adult to adult through technology. And so they're always, they become their kids and they become their families, and they know them so well, and it's just become, they really have become that vehicle to strengthening that relationship with families and schools and inviting them in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I just mention too, it's impressive the training and the meetings that they've had here with the parents, and I could get the schedule of upcoming ones in case the board would be interested in just maybe popping in. You'd be welcome, but it is really, you can see it's a community effort. We also have some other things that are going on that are, you mentioned the restorative practices. We're going to be expanding that with some of the at-risk budget. We're also looking at the community and schools model that we were piloting in a few schools. So we're looking to expand that, and we're likely going to have a presentation or some information coming before the board on that. which is kind of a liaison model, but it's embedded in research on a national level, and it's a partnership with the Michigan Federation of Teachers, the American Federation of Teachers, and it's also endorsed by the National School Board Association as well. So that's one. And then another thing that we're doing, which we're piloting now, but we're expanding, and I know Chris Sipperly's here, is a parent-teacher home visit model. So we would like to continue. Right now we have that at Oakman and Long, but we'd like to expand that, and we do have some funding through title and whatnot that was a positive that we're going to try to expand that. So those are all components that, you know, the things that we do and the services that we offer to the parents. Even at that parent meeting, I mean, the staff was getting computers for the parent, like to get them acclimated, you know, to what they need to do to support their students. And you could see that the parents were just very appreciative. Like when I came and talked to some, you know, or I couldn't, but they were translating with a lot of them, but just the body language. And so the team is really doing a great job with those. But we still have work to do, and we have more things that we can move forward on to help the families.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good job.
Okay, action items. Are there any agenda items on this agenda which board members or the superintendent wish to discuss and vote on separately? If there are, we will exclude these from the motion below.
I think we have 14 items, and I
Right.
think none of them require a roll call vote. Does anyone have questions about any of them? Okay, so we have one motion then.
Okay, move that action items number 1 through 14 be approved as recommended in this agenda.
So moved.
Support.
Does any dissent from this, or is this a unanimous affirmative? Yes, it is.
Yes.
Great, okay. Let's go on.
All right, summary of agenda action items. Number 1, approval of warrants. Number 2, approval of an award to Steinway Piano Gallery. 3, approval of an award to O.W. Larson Company. 4, approval of this is missing something. An award to Munn Tractor and Lawn Incorporated. Approval of an award to Tenable Protective Services. Approval of change orders. Approval of a contract to LaBelle Electrical. Approval of a contract to Purvis and Foster, Inc. Approval of non-instructional and instructional personnel items for P12. Approval of policy updates per Board Report 1763. Approval of financial statement and approval of donations.
Very good. Okay, next item.
Okay, hold on.
Okay.